Did it taste? Okay.
Most southern city in the United States, and where the temperature is pretty much great all the time. Key West is so laid back, and you know, you can go there and just disappear.
When heaven opens up the door.
The perception is that there are no laws, that people can do what they want to do. They run around naked, they get drunk all the time, and they do whatever they want to do.
We are very unique. You might have heard stories about Chicken Fest and Fantasy Fest. Draws in variety of people from from all walks of life.
Either at the end of the line or the beginning of the line, depending on your perspective on the thing. Of course, if you're coming here as a refugee from Cuba, this is where America begins. But a lot of people that come here to get away from the rest of the world because we are a little different.
Just want to have fun and drink and party. It wasn't always that kind of town, though.
We do have law enforcement down here.
We enforce the laws just like they do in any place else. When the sheriff was first elected in 1820s, that he's needed a jail. I mean, you can't be a sheriff without a jail. You have to have some place to put all the bad guys.
Once you were put in jail, they didn't have to be too secure because if you escaped, there was nowhere to go.
Old jail, the oldest jail that's still in existence, was built later, and that operated as the only jail that Monroe County had until 1965.
First one, I'm not sure exactly where it was, but we know that there was a hanging execution in the 1830s, and it took place at that location, so in that vicinity of the current courthouse.
1832. Of course, that was when Monroe County received the first sheriff as well as the first jail.
This was built in the mid to late 1800s. This is the control panel that runs the cells in there, and by pulling these particular handles back and forth, they're not hooked up now, but it runs rods that go up and down the old doors, and it'll open all of them at one time. And what we have is a box, and it is a corridor with 3 cells on each side. And in each one of these cells, there's the old flat strap with the rivets holding the straps together. I'm going to save one of these doors and mount it on the wall in the new jail, I swear I am. And in here, that was space for 4 inmates, but you notice there's no water and no toilet. So if an inmate had to go to the bathroom, he had to go scream and holler until somebody would come and let him out. There's space for 4 in here, 12 on this side, so it made the possibility of 24 inmates in here. Of course, if you had 60, you'd still put them in here. You'd just fill up the side cells and let them stay here in the corridor because that back was closed. Florida model jail standards didn't exist, so we could put 10 in there if we had to.
A linear type of jail, and you probably, if you ever watch early programs on TV, you know, you saw the guy walking around with all kind of keys hanging on him, and of course he's talking to the prisoners and inmates through the bars. It was not a lot of interacting. You put them in there and you pretty much forget about them.
The first one was appointed in 1824 because that's when Key West became the city of Key West, was in 1824.
Shortly thereafter, they established the federal court here to monitor and adjudicate the wrecks on the reef, and established a procedure for handling it up and having a license, and were very strictly regulated after the United States took over the wrecking. Sheriff Knight, he served 2 terms as Monroe County Sheriff. His fame is 1897. A black man named Sylvester Johnson was arrested for raping a white woman outside of town. He was brought in for arraignment in the courthouse. During the arraignment, the newspaper publisher, named Pendleton, stood up in court, drew his revolver, and says, "Is there enough white men here to lynch this guy?" And Sheriff Knight drew his revolver and said, "Anybody step forward, I will shoot you." So they backed down. So they took the prisoner to the jail. The African community here, fearing that, they surrounded the jail that night, armed themselves and surrounded the jail to protect the prisoner. But from lynching, not from being handled by the judicial system, and that's what they said. All they wanted was him to have his day in court. The end result was that Sylvester Johnson was eventually tried in court and executed for the rape, again by hanging at the courthouse.
Frank Adams, who was a black deputy, who was shot just right in this same complex, right next to this building. He was shot while trying to arrest a drunk, I think it was a drunk shrimper or fisherman. And that was in early 1901. The second deputy shot was Guy Bradley.
He was both Audubon game warden and a Monroe County deputy sheriff. And he was enforcing the law against taking birds their feathers, which was a huge business with a lot of money.
They say that feathers were worth more in weight than gold was.
Of course, the feathers went north to the fashion centers of the Northeast at the time, making for ladies' hats primarily.
Guy Bradley, who actually was a plume hunter himself, saw the light and said, "No, this is not right." Went to work for the sheriff's office and paid by the Audubon Society. Then went over to protect the birds. Was shot by prior friends of his who were plume hunters. His wife found his body floating in a dinghy the day after he was shot.
The person who killed him was Walter Smith, who was out in a boat with his sons, and they came upon Bradley, and there's, of course, Bradley's version, we don't know what happened, but Smith and his 2 sons had a version that they were defending themselves against him.
But said that he was shooting in self-defense, and his family, who was on the sailboat, supported that. And so after the guy spent 6 or 7 months in the old jail, he was released, and he was never prosecuted for that shooting.
The interesting thing is, after he left Flamingo, his house was burned with all its contents in it the next day. Well, the last hanging was a guy named Fred Ert, and he was hung in 1904 for a murder. He had met this guy somewhere in town, and they were on the guy's boat and had dinner, and the guy had some money, and Fred murdered him for the money. Proceeded into town and was spending the money, and was pretty easily captured because Fred didn't have any money. And of course, it immediately attracted attention again because it was, like I said again, not a big town. And so Fred was picked up and confessed to the murder, and eventually was executed. When he was executed, there was 2 other people in jail awaiting execution. And both of those were either overturned or commuted. One of them was in jail for killing his girlfriend. His was commuted by the governor to life in prison in the state prison. The other guy in jail was Dutchy Melbourne, who was in jail for killing a Key West policeman. Eventually, Dutchy got his overturned and was sentenced for manslaughter to serve a year in the county jail. While Dutchy was in the county jail, he was rented out to the fire department. as they all commonly did in those days, rented the prisoners out to clean the stables where they kept all the horses. And his gang was still on operation, and they were breaking into cigar factories primarily and burning them down after they robbed them. So he was caught and implicated in that and sent to state prison. He escaped from state prison, made his way down to Southwest Florida, and went to work on a farm run by Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson's rather famous. Peter Matheson wrote a book about killing Mr. Watson, where his neighbors all got together and killed this Mr. Watson because Mr. Watson would hire these people to work on his farm, and at the end of the season he would kill them instead of paying them. And Dutchy was one of the last guys that supposedly Mr. Watson killed before he was killed by his neighbors at Chokoloskee.
This section right here is called the Texas section because when it was built, and this building was built in 1965, like I mentioned, this portion, the steel and these controllers, all these control rods, these boxes up here are full of control rods that unlock these particular doors here, and you can open the doors with a controller that's at the far end of the cell block. But all this metal, steel, was barged in here from Texas. They had renovated a jail in Texas, were throwing this away. The county bought it and barged it here, installed it in this building, which was built in '65. Built the outer wall and just dropped the unit in the middle. I think they had to cut it into pieces in order to do that, but all this controller and these bars and all this stuff was built, I assume it was built in the 30s. It looks like a 1930s or 20s or 30s type jail. Every day at 5 o'clock we had to count noses. Everybody that was over 173 we had to just release on their signature. We couldn't keep them. And of course that would be the drunks or the petty thefts or the shoplifters, the minor crimes. And we would let those people go on their own signatures.
And I was only a part-time worker to do the books and to prepare the canteen for delivery and, you know, to get it started twice a week. Oh, and I remember one time they had this guy in one of the cells over there. He was like on the other side of the building, behind the officers. They have several big cells, big ones on the right, and on the left were cells that were just intended for violent prisoners.
There's a guy who killed a college student, a college male. He strangled him with a wire and then raped him and then strangled him. This is in a small shack. This happened in Almrata, which is about 75 miles north of here. The body was found, underneath the body was found a breakfast food cardboard box, and on that box is a fingerprint. And after the investigation went on, this was not my case, but another detective here in Key West, developed the lead with this guy who was moving around Florida and had committed other murders, and he was matched with that fingerprint that was on that breakfast food box that was underneath the body of the guy that we found in Almrata. So he was arrested and charged with that particular murder. At the time he was in jail, I think it was in Mississippi or Alabama, for other murders he had committed. And because he knew that his rest of his life was going to be spent fighting the system, he resisted court every chance he got. And he stayed in the cell, which was about the size of this one, which is around the back of this whole complex, for years. He was there for like 4 years, 3 or 4 years. And he lived in that 8x8 cell for years. But his option was to go back to Mississippi or Alabama, wherever it was, and go through the trial there. So he just resisted. I guess he liked our little cell better than their little cell, so he stayed there for years and years and years. And the area we are standing now is what they call a day room. This is where the inmates were released from the cells where they slept at night to this area right here. And this was a space they spent in the daytime. And then the corrections officer would walk down that area there, which is about 3 feet wide, but an inmate could reach out there and grab a corrections officer, and they did it all the time. So they wound up welding chain link mesh over that, or diamond plate mesh over those particular bars. It's been removed here, I think, but in some cases it's still in place. And that was to prevent the inmates from reaching out and grabbing the corrections officers, but it also stopped all the air. So there was no airflow either. So not only did you have, 50 or 60 that would stay in this area right here, very, very close, and pretty rough guys. There's also all these solid walls around them that are metal with no air conditioning. In the summertime, the temperature outside was 95. Inside it was much higher than that. This jail then stayed intact, and we used it up until a federal judge told us that we had to, this was inhumane, it was too little, it's too hot, it wasn't air conditioned at the time. And there's no exercise room, there's a little exercise space on the roof. Got to build a new jail, and by the way, you've got to air condition this one while you're doing that one. So they installed air conditioning units, and they did pipe air conditioning in here, but this was not air conditioned for 25 years. And then when they started building the new jail, we said, we don't care what kind of graffiti you put in here. We asked them not to do pornographic graffiti, and they didn't. Very, very little of this graffiti around here is pornographic, but the last year and a half, the inmates that were in here did graffiti, and it wasn't covered up. Normally, as soon as we saw graffiti, we would paint over it, but the graffiti that's in here now, we didn't encourage it, but we neither stopped it. So the inmates started drawing things in the wall, and this place is now covered with graffiti. There's interesting graffiti. This particular cell right here is, that one right back there is where a couple of Indians were staying. There's a lot of Indian graffiti. It's very interesting that is on the walls there. As a matter of fact, there is an Indian, this is an American Indian. I don't know what the tribe is, but an American Indian priest or shaman came in here and blessed this particular place, saying this is a sacred place because of the drawings that were on the wall, and they're still on the wall. And of course, there was other graffiti. Some of it's very, very good. Back in an area they call Formax, which was maximum security. It's back where that guy who killed the college kid stayed. There is a picture of a revolver that looks real. It's a gun, and it's drawn in black and white, but it looks absolutely real. It's very graphic. There's some other three-dimensional stuff that's around. But the place is now full of graffiti. Just because it's here now doesn't mean we allowed it when we had inmates here, but we did allow them to do that prior to them leaving this building, going to the new jail. We have had escapes from this particular jail. As a matter of fact, one guy, on the other side of this wall is an attorney visitation room, and it's a drop ceiling. It's just a regular drop ceiling. It doesn't have any, it's not like this one here is solid steel, I think. That one is a regular drop ceiling. The inmate got out while his attorney was visiting him, got up into the ceiling, and he was able to crawl. He crawled all over this place. He couldn't get out of the building though, and he crawled out of all over this whole area on top of the ceiling and below the floor above us. And he's up there for a day before he finally gave up because he couldn't eat or drink and didn't have any water. So he finally gave up and came down. But we knew he was up there, and we knew he couldn't get any place. We've also had inmates that in the same exercise yard on the roof here that went over the concertina wire. And that's really rough. But what they do is they take blankets or something heavy. The more blankets you can get, obviously, the better off you are. 4 or 5 blankets, and you throw over the concertina wire, then you can crawl over the top of it. And then you're on the parapet that goes around the exercise yard, then you have to crawl down the outside, kind of like Spider-Man, but down the brickwork. But it can be done, and inmates have done it. So we've had escapes from this building here. Was a former city commissioner who stayed here, probably lived in one of these cells right here, and he was protesting the development of a park area. He went into the construction trailer with a gallon can of gasoline and saying that he was going to blow that trailer up, the construction trailer up, and kill himself. Unless he had a meeting with a state senator. He held himself hostage actually for about 12 hours, and eventually our our negotiator talked him out, and he surrendered. And then he was charged with the attempted destruction of the construction trailer, and he was held in this jail right here. And he was actually the last inmate released from this jail when we built the new jail. So he may have been in this cell right here, and he was the last one that walked out of this door going to the new jail.
We are the most southern jail in the United States. This particular facility here is built on stilts. We're about 12 feet off the ground, and of course the reason why we're in a very low flood level, this facility was built for a Category 5 hurricane, so we don't go anywhere, we don't evacuate, so we have to stay here. With that, we need to be prepared to take on the element. This particular jail is what we call direct supervision. Direct supervision enables the officer to actually be inside of the dorms and units where the inmates are. This red line represents authority in a restricted area. If you notice this red line, it came from a concept from the United States Marine Corps. I ran brigs in the military, I was Master Chief, and what we tried to instill when we have this red line or any type of run a red line brig is that the inmates will ensure that they will follow the rule in reference to this red line. If you step across this red line, you have just violated that policy and you will be held accountable for it. This was found during some of the numerous cell searches that we do. And I made mention before how creative inmates are. And this is some of their creativity here. We have a program called Art Behind Bars. Art Behind Bars actually started here at this facility back in 1994, where we have an instructor named Lynn Van Trickler. She came up with an idea of bringing art into a jail setting.
Carmen, okay? Art Behind Bars, starring.
Nothing else?
I've coming to jail since I've been about like 18.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the stained glass butterfly with like different colors in its wings and stuff.
Well, I had a tour of the jail when it first opened 11 years ago, and I couldn't believe how few programs there were, especially for women.
Sometimes even inmates and people in general do not express themselves that well.
It relieves a lot of stress of being in here. It's something to look forward to.
And some of the talents that we have seen come through this program is unreal.
We like to think we're taking a totally different approach, and giving them a chance to express themselves can have a very positive effect once they're out, trying to reconnect with kids, parents, sisters, brothers.
There's one particular young lady now that completed the program. She is now in a higher educational program for artists. She have had art on display in some of the galleries here in Key West.
Because there's usually not zoos under a jail.
Hey, come on, guys.
I've never in my life heard of a farm underneath of a jail.
We gotta keep them safe so people don't step on them.
Well, the first time my friends told me, like, oh, have you ever been to the zoo or to the jail? And I'm thinking, why would I want to go there?
We're a petting zoo. You know, we open up for the local kids to come in.
Here in Key West, nobody ever sees a farm animal. You don't know what a cow looks like. Milk comes in a bottle. It doesn't come in a cow.
Does it feel like what you thought it'd feel like?
Yeah.
Well, obviously the animals have a safe haven, a great place to live and live out their lives, because usually once they come here, they stay here. It's a funny story that I've heard about a hog, as they say, mounting a hog. I don't want to go any further, you know. I can go further with that story, but he got arrested, as it were, and brought here onto the farm.
Everything there has either been abandoned, mistreated, taken from the owner for mistreatment for one reason or another.
We had a gentleman that had a small van, and inside were 2 gators, some snakes, dogs. Again, this is before my time, but they were all living in bags and inside this vehicle. You know, again, he stayed with us, and they came to stay with us too.
We have snakes and caimans and big turtles that people just can no longer take care of. And so we have quite a few animals now.
You want to hold him?
He's actually harmless.
And he's a hedgehog. You know what he is?
It's a face only a mother could love.
So we have a very select few inmates who pass the criteria, who can come and work with the animals.
They want to do this. It's a reward for the inmates to be able to work in the farm.
They said if I wasn't afraid of cows or horses, then I said no. So I started working here.
And I ended up here, unfortunately, and I applied immediately to work on the farm. You can hear the animals when you're in your cell, but you can't see them. Being down here with them is quite an honor.
Good Lord's looking after us, see, to set us up.
The 1980 Marietta boat lift, believe it or not, we was in the old jail during that time frame. And of course, you know, you had over 100,000 plus people, you know, coming over from Cuba. Then we became a holding area for those particular, that particular time, inmates, until INS and Custom figured out what they was going to do with them. So it was a lot of involvement, the sheriff's office, the military, the Coast Guard, both Navy and Coast Guard. Tremendous amount of working together as law enforcement entities to process all of these people and to try to weave through who is a criminal and who's not.
And so we even house inmates for immigration service. We have about 100 that stay there every day in the Key West jail for immigration. Of course, they pay us, and it offsets our costs. We don't make any profit on it, but it offsets our costs. It brings in about $1 million a year. We're the southernmost county in the continental United States.
I think this is a place to come and party.
At one time, people thought that I can go south and no one would know me.
Our crime reports are full of people who have done strange things here.
I say, is that fair?